My name is Randy Watkins. I am the first vice president of the Lansing branch of the NAACP. I'm also the education chair, and I would like to thank our candidates for being here, and more importantly, I'd like to thank you for being here. If you are interested in joining the NAACP, I have membership applications in the back. If you are not registered to vote, I have voter applications in the back, and so do one of the two before you leave here today. But once again, I want to thank you. Let's keep this civil. Let's be polite. I know there's a lot of voter anger out there in the community overall, not necessarily here in the Lansing area. But let's not try and bring negativity into the room today. Do we have a coin?
I do not have a coin on me.
I have Bitcoin on my phone.
No, I think in that person.
We got a coin. Because we didn't. Oh, we got one right there. Okay.
That's what we have to say.
Yes. Call it me. It is heads. So based on the scientific method, Ms. Slotkin is going to begin about 5 minutes, and then we will move to Brian.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Elissa Slotkin. Just to make sure you're in the right room, I am running for Congress in Michigan's 8th District. And the 8th District, we're sitting in the 8th District right now. It's all of Ingham County, all of Livingston County, and North Oakland County. And I live in Holly in North Oakland County. I grew up exclusively in Oakland County on that side of the district. We had a family farm in Holly, which is now where I'm living again. But my entire background is in national security. And that is because of the anniversary we had a few days ago of 9/11. I was on my second day of graduate school in New York City. I just moved there when 9/11 happened. And by the time the day was over, I knew that national security was what I was going to do for a career. Within a year of that, I was recruited by the CIA to be a Middle East analyst, and within a year of that, I was voluntold, as we say, to go to Iraq. I started 3 tours in Iraq with the CIA alongside the military and our diplomats. I was working on understanding the groups that were shooting at U.S. forces and plotting against the U.S. homeland. In between those 3 tours in Iraq, I was working, to be honest, for both Democrats and Republicans, whoever was my commander-in-chief. I started under the Bush administration, and I continued under the Obama administration. And I tell people that I worked 14 years in national security, 3 tours in Iraq, and no one ever asked me if I was a Democrat or Republican, because it just didn't matter. It didn't come up. I met my husband on my 3rd tour in Iraq. He's a career Army officer, 30 years as an Apache pilot, and I have 2 stepdaughters, both in service. One is a brand new Army officer, the other one is a brand new physician for the VA. So we're a service family, and the clearest reason I can tell you for why I started to think about running was because after seeing Democrats in office, after seeing Republicans in office, I believe that what's going on right now in Washington, the tenor and tone of politics is fundamentally unbecoming of the country that I served and the country we all love. So I started thinking about running. What pushed me over the edge, and what is very fundamental to why I'm running, is the issue of healthcare. I was reticent to get in. I've never run for office. This is the first time I've gone for elected office. My husband and I had never made a political donation to a campaign, never been to a political event, and never went to a debate like this. And so we were reticent to get in until May of last year. And May of last year was the first time the House of Representatives voted to repeal the ACA or Obamacare or health care without a replacement, without a plan. For me, health care is extremely personal. My mom passed away in 2011 from ovarian cancer. And when she was diagnosed, she did not have health care. She had let it lapse. She struggled with health care her whole life because she had breast cancer as a 31-year-old mom. So she always had a pre-existing condition. And when she lost her job in 2002, she lost her insurance. She went 5.5 years without. In 2008, my brother and I helped her get insurance. It was $1,000 a month with a nearly $10,000 deductible. Her highest bill, higher than her rent. And in July of 2009, without us knowing, she let it lapse. In September of 2009, she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So I'm sure many of you have had the experience of having a loved one get a terminal diagnosis. It was the first time for me having a parent sick. Your life as you know it explodes. And that same month that my life was exploding, we were spending our time filling out the paperwork, preparing for her to declare bankruptcy. So when I saw Mike Bishop, Mr. Bishop, in May of 2017 on the White House lawn. There was a Rose Garden ceremony that was carried live on TV, and he was smiling and beaming and proud that he had voted to repeal health care with no plan for what came next and no plan to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Something broke for me, and I turned to my husband and said no. I consider that dereliction of duty. I consider it a fireable offense, and we decided to get in the race that day. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you to LCC and then NAACP for having us. Welcome your questions. Looking forward to talking about some real issues. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to stand up. I just feel like more appropriate. My name is Brian Ellison. I'm a Libertarian candidate for the 8th Congressional District here in Michigan. This is also my first campaign. I've never been a candidate for any elected office in my life. I take that back. I ran for, I think, vice president of student council when I was in junior high. I lost that race, so I kind of gave up on politics for a while. But I finally decided it was time to give it a shot now. I was in the military. Out of high school, I went to MSU, just down the street here for one semester. Came from a family with not a lot of means. I didn't have the means to pay for college, and I decided at that time I didn't want to go into debt. And so what I did was I enlisted in the Army and got the bonus for the Army College Fund. And that's how I was going to fund my education. So I joined the Army. I served time. I was over served time, literally. While I was in Europe for a couple of years. I did a tour in Bosnia. I did a tour in Kosovo. I came back stateside. Was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas. That's where I met my wife, Michelle, who was also a service member. We got married. We've been married almost 19 years at this point. We have 3 kids. After I got off active duty, I joined the National Guard. And the reason why I chose the National Guard is because I wanted to continue my education, but I also wanted to continue my service. And the National Guard was a great opportunity to do that. I saw it as an opportunity to help with disaster recovery. And if there's hurricanes, we were in Texas at the time, there was flooding, that I'd be able to help my community. And so I decided to enlist in the National Guard. After my wife got off active duty, we moved to Tucson, Arizona, and I was attending architecture school at the University of Arizona. And I got a phone call. Hey, your National Guard unit has been activated to go to Iraq. So what does going to Iraq have to do with keeping my community safe? This is what the National Guard is supposed to do. And but what are you going to do? The government tells you you're going to go, so I went to Iraq. I dropped out of architecture school. I didn't have a choice. I lost my credits, went overseas. I saw really all the horrible things that we do as an occupying force when we're overseas. Certainly talking to the people there, and listening to the stories that they tell about how unsafe and how unstable we made their lives by invading their country. And it was at that point, it was before I went over there, I realized, kind of this was all a sham. There was really no good reason for us to go into Iraq, but again, I was obligated to go, so I did. And so when I came back, I had a family. I had 2 kids at the time. My wife got pregnant shortly after I got back from Iraq in 2005. We had our daughter, our 3rd child. And we moved back to Michigan in 2005, and I've been working in construction ever since, and really just kind of focusing on raising my family and trying to live the American dream. And what I found is that the American dream it's a myth. It's not for all of us. We all don't have an opportunity for the American dream. Some of us do, some of us don't, and the privileged few do. The government insiders do. The career politicians do. And the rest of us that are just struggling every month to pay our bills and raise our family, see the government taking more from us and providing us with less. And so I wanted to become active, and I wanted to be able to make a difference. And right now, in this race, there's a choice between a Republican who sometimes acts like a Democrat and a Democrat who sometimes acts like a Republican, which the differences are negligible. There's very few differences. And then you have somebody like me who understands how fundamentally flawed government is and how government is not the solution to any of our problems. Government is a contributor to our problems. And so my platform is really on eliminating government, getting government out of the way of us being able to function as a peaceful society. And I spent a lot of my time in activism. Lately I've been active against police violence. I've been arrested a handful of times over the last couple of months, facing a few misdemeanor charges because of that. But the fight's worth it because people are being killed and oppressed in this country on a daily basis, and I just wouldn't feel right if I sat back and let it happen to other people without using my platform and using my voice. So again, Bryan Ellison, and I look forward to a spirited conversation today.
We'll start with why should LCC students be interested in this campaign? How will they be impacted by the results of this election?
Well, I'd be happy to go first. I think the students should be interested in this campaign just because, again, this is a campaign that's very different than most of the campaigns in the state right now, and certainly in the country. You have three choices, and typically you have. I guess maybe you really have two choices, but typically you have the illusion of choice, and in this race you have more than an illusion of choice. You really have some stark differences between the candidates. And so I think that LCC students should really be interested in engaging in this election specifically, because again, government is only growing. If you elect Mike Bishop or you elect Elissa Slotkin, government is continue to grow. It's going to grow bigger. It's going to take more control over your life. And if you feel like somebody else can run your life better than you can, then don't vote for me. If you think that you are intelligent enough and capable enough to run your own lives, then you have an opportunity to vote for somebody who believes in that as well.
So I interpreted the question as being why it be invested in a congressional race. There's lots of other races going on at any other level, at lots of other levels in the state. We have a gubernatorial, we have ballot initiatives. I think the thing that is sometimes missed with federal races is that we do have an opportunity to put an actual check and balance in Washington back into our system. I think our founding fathers designed our system to be ones and checks and balances, and right now we have complete control and number of senior leaders in our Congress who are just staying quiet as things continue to bubble along in Washington. I don't think that's the role of a leader. I don't think that's the role of any person who's been elected by members of their community. And I think that we have an opportunity to sort of change the culture of Congress by changing who we send to serve there. I think there are people around the country who are running, similar to me, never thought of running 10 years ago. Wasn't in our kind of bucket list. And now we have a generation across the country of a lot of women, a lot of folks running from underrepresented groups who are working to change the culture of Congress and succeeding, even in some of the primaries. So I think it's interesting to be a part of that. We need 23 seats to flip the House of Representatives. And I think that Michigan can be a place where we really actually demonstrate that after all the vitriol of 2016 and 2017, we have the opportunity to change the course of the country by sending a signal, and I think that the 8th District is part of that.
I forgot one really important item when I introduced myself, and that is to tell you that the NAACP is nonpartisan. We do not endorse candidates. So please remember that. We are not endorsing candidates. We are providing a forum for you to make a decision on your own. Next question. Many Michigan families are in desperate need of better health, including young families. How can we as a community support better health care?
So, as I said, I got into this race because of healthcare, and I think we are not settled as a nation on how we're going to provide healthcare to our citizens. Anyone you talk to, no one feels settled about how their health, either the price of their healthcare, their access to healthcare. I know many people in this district will talk to me about how they technically have healthcare, but because the monthly premiums are so high and the deductible is so high, they can't actually access their own healthcare, right? So to me, what we need to do is revamp the ACA. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, you revamp the ACA, and critically, you provide a buy-in to Medicare. I believe that any person at any age should be able to buy into Medicare. And I actually think this will become an extremely strong issue for Republicans and Democrats alike, right? The number of people I know who are business owners who will tell me, man, if I didn't have to provide health care through my job here, I would be able to grow exponentially. And for all those people I've met who've said, man, I can't stand my job, I'm in a dead-end job, but I need the health care so I can't leave. I think if you create a buy-in to Medicare, you create opportunities for people to get a good program at a good price, and then it creates a massive competition for all the other healthcare plans out there to decrease prices. Then we need to allow Medicare to buy prescription drugs in bulk. This one could be solved tomorrow. I'm on military insurance. The VA is allowed to buy drugs in bulk. So if I stub my toe and get an infection, and someone on Medicare stubs their toe and gets an infection, and we walk into the same CVS for the same prescription, I pay roughly half to 2/3 of what that Medicare patient pays, for no other reason than greed. And so I think those are the two things that we can do most immediately that would help create competition and bring down prices for everybody.
So I think that fundamentally the way that health insurance is structured right now is it's a terrible system. So I think that if you take an analogy, right? So in the state of Michigan, car insurance is the highest in the nation, right? And it's ridiculous. And could you imagine the cost, how much more it would cost if you were forced to buy a car insurance policy that covered everything from oil changes to accidents? Well, that's what you're forced to purchase for health care. Why are we purchasing preventative care? Why are we purchasing an insurance program that provides checkups, that provides for doctor visits? And these are ridiculous things that shouldn't be included in an insurance program. Insurance should be to cover your risk. And so I think that the better model for healthcare is that you should have a direct provider, and there's programs out there, there's doctors out there that do this without accepting insurance, and it cuts out that entire cost of that bureaucracy on both the government side and the insurance company side. So I think if you focus on direct care for basic patient needs, and you focus on insurance only for disaster. So, a high deductible policy for the unexpected. Everybody expects to go for a checkup. Everybody expects they're going to get a physical. Everybody expects all these normal things. And those should be things that you pay for just like you pay for your bills every month. And if that was the case, if you were a knowledgeable consumer walking into a doctor's office and you said, hey, how much does it cost for a checkup? How much does it cost for a doctor's visit? You're going to get a much better deal than walking in there and going for a negotiated rate that you'd have no business knowing what's going on there, because it's between the doctor's office and the insurance company. And so I think that's where you create better competition, is by getting the insurance companies out of every part of the medical business that you can.
This is going to be a fun question for you. My personal answer is the latest issue of the NAACP magazine, The Crisis, gives a grade to all of the congressional delegations, and with the exception of maybe 4 Michigan representatives, everyone got an F. Mike Bishop got an F from the NAACP, which may be why he is not here today, which is the question. Why do you think he is not here today?
My turn to go first.
I go.
Yeah.
I think it's my turn.
We're just switching back and forth.
Why is he not here today? Because we know that historically in a broken political system, the incumbent always has an advantage. So the incumbent is going to hold his position. He doesn't want to expose himself. He doesn't want to open himself up to have a discussion with people who have different ideas. He's in a position of power right now, and he wants to secure that power. And the best way for him to secure that is to cut everybody else out of the loop. So he doesn't have to be responsive to the people. And the people in the Lansing community certainly are not his constituents. You are, but he doesn't care. You're not his people, right? He's a Republican, and that's how partisan politics works. And so I think he's not here because he doesn't have anything to gain by being here. All he has is something to lose.
So I can't speak to his motivations and his schedule and why he didn't show up today. I did challenge him to, the night that I won the primary, I did challenge him to 3 public in-person debates. We didn't hear from him for 20 days, so we sent a certified letter to make sure he got the request. We didn't hear for another 5 or 6 days, and then he publicly came out and challenged me to 3 debates. So whichever way we do it, that's fine. I'm happy that he has agreed to do 3 debates, and I hope that we will get those schedules. We're in touch with his campaign. I think the basic job requirement for anyone who's an elected official is to be responsive and be accountable to the people who elected them. It's just like the basic job description. He has not met in a truly public forum where questions like this can be asked to him extemporaneously for 22 months. And so it's one of the things I hear most about on the campaign trail, particularly in Ingham County, that he's not here, he's not available. People can't reach him. He obviously made the decision when he came into office that he would close down the Lansing office and his liaison officers, so we don't have a presence here for his office. I have made the pledge that if elected, I would return an office to Lansing, and I would create liaison officers to underrepresented groups, particularly the African American community, the Latino community, and the gay community. So I hope to see him soon at other debates.
Thank you. Is the Affordable Care Act our best option for the future or a first step? Please discuss the role of federal government with two parts. That's question number one. So I'll let both of you answer question number one. Which is the Affordable Care Act our best option for the future or a first step?
I think it's a first step. I think similarly to Social Security. You know, if you learn the lessons of history, Social Security took 8 years and 3 legislative fixes to get it to the place where most people don't think of Social Security as controversial. And I think we are not yet through what we need to do on the ACA. It was a good first step. I believe, obviously, most importantly in protecting people who have pre-existing conditions, that they shouldn't be discriminated against because they happen to be born with asthma or happen to have had breast cancer as a young woman. So I believe it's a first step. I think we have to be honest that the ACA is not working for a lot of people. There are lots of people in our district, as I said, who are paying too much in monthly premiums, and their deductible is so high that they can't actually use their health care. And we have to own that, and we have to understand that. And so I believe that it is the first step to getting us to health as we figure out how we as a nation are going to provide health care to our citizens.
Okay, and I would say I kind of reject the premise of the question because I don't think it's a step in the right direction in either case. So certainly it's not the end-all, be-all, and I think it's a step in the wrong direction. I think that forced government intervention in a market has proven to be the downfall of those markets. If you look at our education system, the government's all over the education system, and our education is subpar compared to the rest of the world. And so I think it's interesting that the analogy was given to Social Security and how Social Security took several fixes in order to get it working. Social Security is an insolvent program. So if we're looking at comparing the steps that we're taking right now to a program that is doomed to fail and that's doing nothing but placing a debt burden on future generations, I think that that's very telling of what we're doing right now with the Affordable Care Act. So again, I would say government being involved in healthcare is a bad idea, and I think that ultimately, while I wouldn't say that if I would that when I go to Washington, I'm going to eliminate Medicaid and cut coverage for people, because I think that's heartless, and I don't think that that's a first step. But I think ultimately the ideal situation is the government wouldn't be involved in your medical care at all, and you would have a free market and charitable institutions that would fill the gaps in the free market like we did back 100 years ago.
The second part of the question is, please discuss the role of the federal government in education funding.
Okay. This is an easy one to answer. The federal government's role in education funding it doesn't exist. First of all, the government doesn't fund anything, right? The government doesn't have anything that it doesn't take from us as citizens. So why are we taking, as a collective group, in Lansing here, why are you sending your money to Washington so that a bureaucrat in Washington can decide how to distribute it, and you can hope that you get some of your money back? So I don't think the federal government has any business being involved in education at all. If it was up to me, I'd abolish the Department of Education altogether and let the states handle it.
So I take an alternative view. What I would say is, I would hazard a guess that there are students, certainly here at LCC, but other places around the city that are the beneficiaries of Pell Grants and federal grants to help with tuition. I think that while largely public education is determined by the governor and sort of who's in charge of the state, that there's an important role in the federal government, for instance, setting standards. I think that that's important, particularly as we have seen in our state, the movement to just an explosion of private for-profit companies taking over education. I think that there are certain responsibilities, if you're going to take U.S. taxpayer dollars, that you should have to live up to. And that means educating all of our kids, right? Whether you're special needs or ESL, if you're going to take taxpayer dollars, those companies should have to provide for that education as well. And I think that the federal government could do quite a bit on the issue of student loans. Student loans right now, you go and get a student loan, you pay the same rate for interest as you do if you want to like build a deck on your house. I personally believe that student loans should be capped at 2.5%. Educating yourself and investing in your future are different than getting a new deck on your house. And I think that it should be retroactive. So if we manage to change the policy and you've been paying, your student loans are long behind you, but you're still paying, you should be able to refinance those loans just like you can refinance your house, your mortgage on your house, to 2.5%. So I think the federal government does have a role.
This is just for Ms. Slotkin. I plan on voting for you. If elected, given the failures of intelligence and I guess George Tenet's slam dunk, etc., leading to the Iraq War, what level of skepticism do you foresee bringing to possible future war buildups? Given what we know now about the Bush-Iraq War justifications, do you think we need to bring a higher level of doubt to official justifications for wars?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is very important is that right now our Congress has basically, since the Iraq War, given up on its constitutional responsibility to provide decision-making and oversight on when we deploy our forces abroad. That basically the vote on Iraq was so controversial that they've stepped away from their Article I responsibilities of providing advice and consent on that. And I think that's something that, as someone who's married to a career Army officer and has a stepdaughter in the Army, I am extremely focused on providing that oversight, and I think I would be in a unique place to do it. Listen, I was a Middle East specialist before the Iraq War, and anyone who had a background in the Middle East would tell you that the decision to do a preemptive war and a large ground war in the Middle East was a mistake. It's a generational mistake, and we're still dealing with that mistake. But once my country goes in, I want it to succeed. And I want it to come out of there as well as we could have, especially with a husband who served 4 years in combat. What I think will help me be a better congressperson is A, having the experience of working in a war zone and knowing the consequences of those policy decisions taken in Washington. B, being an Army wife and an Army mom who knows that it will be my stepdaughter who's going over to the Middle East or to Afghanistan to continue to fight in these wars. And then number 3, knowing, particularly coming from the Pentagon, the level of cost of these engagements abroad and the consequences of doubling down on those wars as opposed to investing here at home. So I think that my experience would make me, hopefully, a more skeptical and more positive force in Congress than just sort of another person off the street.
Brian, you want to chip in or get to the next question?
Sure, I'd love to chip in. So I think that I also have an interesting perspective. Again, having the military experience, being deployed, being a military spouse myself. I don't have children that are in the military, and I don't intend to have children in the military because I've seen how the military abuses children, abuses well-intentioned people who go in to join. I've seen how the VA doesn't take care of them. My wife is a disabled vet and gets horrible care from the VA. And so there's consequences on the back end of all of these foreign wars that we can't, we talk about the cost of war, which is ridiculous and it's outrageous. And that's the first thing we should cut in spending. And more than being a skeptic, I would be extremely actively opposed to any foreign engagement because I don't think that there's any threat abroad that warrants an invasion of U.S. military forces. And so, I would be more than a skeptic. I feel like I would probably be one of the few voices of reason. Unfortunately, war is a profitable business, and there's a lot of special interest groups that contribute quite a bit to both sides of the proverbial aisle for the Washington elite, and so war continues. And I think that the difference that I would be able to bring is that there's no lobbyists that are knocking on my door to give me any money. There's no special interest groups that are going to donate to me, and there's nobody that would have control over me. I would be just like if you were in Congress. I have just the same feeling as just an individual, not being bought and paid for, and not having any other outside interest or anybody that I owe favors to.
Knowing that the Democratic and Libertarian parties want campaign reform not based on big money, what would you suggest you would do for reforming political elections? Maybe use the British model for elections?
Well, I think the first thing that I would do hold on, I lost my train of thought here for a second. I mean, we want to limit the amount of money that is going into campaigns. The problem is with where all these PACs are involved, and it's no longer individuals that are making contributions to campaigns. It's corporations that are making contributions to campaigns. It's corporations that are owning our government. And so I think that we want to bring, and I don't know what that looks like and how you make a government regulation that keeps money out of political campaigns. But right now, political campaigns are bought and paid for. Whoever spends the most, whoever has the most commercials, whoever gets the most attention. And again, this money doesn't come from you and I in individual contributions. It comes from people who have other interests aside from what we want as individuals. And so I think that campaign reform, certainly one thing I would focus on is term limits. I think that you have somebody like Mike Bishop, who's been a career politician, up through the state, and he term limit out in the state, and now he's in Congress, and there's no term limits, and if it's up to him, he'll be there until he dies, and that's a significant problem that we have in Congress. And I think that career politicians are terrible for us as a society, and so I would think that probably the first likely step that I would suggest would be to limit terms, congressional terms, to maybe 2 terms. I think that the concept of a citizen government has gone out the window, and I think that we need to reclaim that as citizens.
So one of the saddest things that I experienced just from all our door knocking is, knocking on someone's door, and you open the door and you say, hey, are you voting in November? And they'll say, you know what, I'm not voting. And they sort of proudly tell you that they're not voting. And when you ask them, why, they'll say, because both parties are corrupt, both parties are broken, the system is broken, they've sort of given up, and they're bowing out of the system. And I will tell you, as a national security person, I consider that a threat to democracy. If people no longer believe that our system works for them and represents them, that is a problem. And so I think there's a couple of important things we can do. And if I am elected, I hope to be a part of a class whose number one first bill in Congress is on campaign finance reform and government accountability. Because I think it undergirds every problem that we have. It's the role of money in politics and lack of accountability. So you can do a couple of things. First, you can require full disclosure for anyone making a political donation. Right now, if someone in this room wants to give me $15, they need to tell me their name, their address, and their occupation. But if you want to donate $15 million to a super PAC, you don't have to disclose who you are or anything about you. That's crazy, right? So full disclosure. Then we need caps on spending. I mean, the idea that in the last election, Mr. Bishop spent $3 million in order to win this seat, we need to accept that as just out of proportion for what we are trying to do here. Doesn't make any sense. So caps on spending on campaigns. And then I would personally be for limiting the campaign period. So it doesn't go on for 2 years, right? And everything you're hearing about for 2 years that go with that. I personally think, and I've pledged to do, as I said, a town hall every 3 months. You have to go and stand in front of people. And then number 2, publish your weekly calendar. Just tell us what you're doing, right? If you're a representative and the people elect you, how are you spending your time? Because that's the greatest, clearest example we have of how you prioritize. Are you meeting with big donors and sitting with lobbyists, or are you actually working, engaging with people? I made the decision in January that I would not be taking any corporate PAC dollars during the life of this campaign, in contrast to Mr. Bishop, who's taken over $1 million of corporate PAC money, because I wanted to be crystal clear that my vote could not be bought, particularly from the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, who are some of his biggest donors. So I think restoring some faith in democracy means correcting our system on campaign finance and government accountability.
Remember, if you have a question, please write it down. So we've got about 15 to 20 minutes left. What can we expect to see, no matter who or which party controls Congress, in terms of Congress engaging in real oversight of the executive branch? If you win the 8th district, how will you work toward oversight?
So the most important thing is that whichever party is in power in the U.S. Congress gets to determine the agenda. They have the chairmanship of the committees, but they also set the agenda for who comes and testifies, who comes and briefs, who is up and being brought in front of Congress to be accountable for their actions. And that goes for average citizens. They can call average citizens to come testify. They can also call on the executive branch to answer for some of the decisions that they've been making. And I think just that, putting a little sunlight on some of the decisions. Let's talk about protecting the environment, right? Some of the decisions that have gone on quietly, without a whole lot of sunlight over the past year and a half, have major implications for us in the Great Lakes state, for our water, right? Not just our Great Lakes, but our drinking water. So having a little bit more sunlight where the committee chairmen and chairwomen now get to call people in front of them and talk about what those changing of those protections would mean for actual people, I think we could use a little bit of that. And then just being a stronger voice, right, and sending a signal that the population out there is unhappy with the way things are going, and they want additional voices in the conversation. So I think that's first and foremost what Congress can do to help put a check and balance on the situation.
So you premised the question with when one or the other party takes control, and so we're locked into this dichotomy of we have a choice between Republicans and Democrats, and as Ms. Slotkin pointed out, a lot of voters are really discouraged by that system and know that they're really not getting a choice. And so when I go to Washington, I'm not going to be beholden to party leadership, and fundamentally that's one of the biggest flaws in the two-party system, is that the junior representatives have to conform to what, certainly if they want to participate in any committees, they have to conform to what their party leadership says, and so they have to toe the party line. And so you see these votes and these issues that are down party lines. And do you guys really believe that there is a strict divide between people in Washington, D.C., that this group of people fundamentally strictly believes this, and this group of people fundamentally strictly believes that? I mean, it's absurd. And so I think that the idea that any Republican or Democrat can go to Washington, D.C. and independently represent their constituents, I think it's false hope. I think that we spend for the presidential elections every 4 years, if we can just get a Democrat back in the office, then they'll fix it. And then the Democrats there for 8 years, and then we say, well, if we can just get a Republican now, we can fix it. And ultimately, everything keeps going in the same direction of more government control and certainly less oversight. And I think that reclaiming that as a congressman, reclaiming for instance, war powers. That's one thing where Congress has completely let it go. They've completely given it over to the executive branch, and the executive branch has abused that to the tune of bombing and killing brown people on the other side of the world for the last 20 years, 15 years. And that needs to stop. And so we, as Congress people, we need to be able to take that ball back and say, no, you don't get to choose that you can bomb somebody whenever you want, wherever you want, for whatever you want. You can only bomb people when it's a national security threat and the Congress has given you the express authorization to do so. And so that's the first power that I would push to reclaim in Congress.
We have two questions that basically cover the same topic, so here we go. Acknowledging that good cops are heroes and the true majority of officers are good cops, as a defense attorney, I often meet victims of police brutality. One, what will you do to protect Michigan citizens from bullies with badges? And two, have you done anything as a candidate to fight police brutality?
I think this is me. Man, this feels like a softball. So, yeah, fundamentally, this is one of my biggest issues. So, growing up, I had wanted to be a police officer, and that was one of the first classes I enrolled in was criminal justice when I was at Michigan State. Obviously, things changed and my direction changed, and I went into the construction industry. But a few years ago, I was arrested for driving without my license in my pocket. I questioned a police officer about searching my car illegally, and he said, well, I can arrest you right now. And I said, if you think that solves the problem, then let's do that. And so we did. And so it again became much more personal for me. And I think that saying that fundamentally most police officers are good or are heroes, I think that hero worship is dangerous to us as a society. And I think that holding police accountable is something that is absolutely critical to the security of a free state. And so I have put myself out in front of this problem. I'm dealing with, again, I have 6 pending misdemeanors right now just from protesting against a corrupt police department that killed 2 unarmed men in between April and May of this year. And I'm fighting that fight myself. I took it to them. This wasn't something that they said, that they attacked me and I was on the defensive. I said, this is wrong. You need to be transparent about this. Police need to be held accountable when they execute people. And I'm trying to bring the attention to this problem, and instead I'm being attacked. And so I fight for that every day. I fight for accountability, police accountability, and that's one thing that will always be near and dear to me. And I will never use it for virtue signaling or pretending like I care or taking a knee at the national anthem. That's not what it's about for me. This is a real problem, and it needs to be addressed, and not just because it's politically expedient.
So I think the goal is to have a police force that understand the community, that work with the community, and that are better. So I think the goal is to make the police force better. And I think that the way that you do that is you create a situation where they can listen to the community, learn from the community, and then where there is accountability to the community. And I think that last piece has definitely not been on the agenda, that people are held accountable. We see the same thing for a place like Michigan State and Larry Nassar. There's just a lack of a system that allows people to be treated with the seriousness of the crime they were accused, and then held accountable when they're found to be credible allegations. So I think that's the first step. I think the other step is actually listening to people. I haven't made it my personal war on cops, as your website says, to go to the police force and protest in front of them. I have instead listened to people who have been victims of police brutality. So we've gone and visited church groups. We have gone and held meetings with the NAACP. We have talked about raising the age for our criminal justice system so that children aren't being sent and treated as adults. And we are trying to hear from people to understand how this affects the community here in Lansing and other parts of the district.
Still hanging in there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there we go. It is clear that politics has become very polarized, and members of both sides of the aisle have shown more willingness to vote according to what the party dictates. As a candidate, are you willing to vote based on what your constituents need rather than what your party tells you?
Yeah. So this one's an easy one for me. Because I worked for both Democratic and Republican administrations, I've had both Democratic and Republican bosses. I have learned a few things about working across the aisle and actually getting things done. And you have to do basically 3 things if you're going to work in that kind of a bipartisan environment. You have to speak truth to power, you have to be independently minded, and you have to put your country before your party. And that is what I intend to bring to the Congress. To make it, put a very fine point on it, I think I've been asked the question many times, will you just salute to Nancy Pelosi or whoever the leader is of the Democrats? And I said very early on publicly that while I never want to be rude to anyone who has served their country, particularly a woman who has broken glass ceilings, I think we need to hear what people are telling us. And people are telling us they want a new generation of leadership on both sides of the aisle. And so I would not vote for Nancy Pelosi. I've been clear about that. So I consider myself an extremely independently minded person, and that kind of pragmatic approach is what we need more of, not less of, since both parties right now have forgotten that they have actually a job mandate to get in a room together and talk and hash things out and come out with a plan.
So I think that the question is a little bit different for me, obviously, because I wouldn't be beholden to any party regardless. But I think that the concept of representing the constituents is an easy one. It's certainly easy to say, yes, I would represent my constituents and I would give what's best for my constituents. But a lot of times what we forget when we think about the constituency is we think about what's best for the majority, and we're going to do what's best for the majority. As long as we're 51% of the people support something, then that's what I would vote for, and that's not what I would do. So I'm not going to tell you maybe what you want to hear, and maybe this is a bad thing, but ultimately I think that there's a fundamental responsibility of leaders to protect the interest of the minority. That's what the concept of a republic is, that it's a respect for individual rights. And so if you're in the 49% minority, does that mean that your voice doesn't count? Does that mean that the 51% should be able to trample over your rights? And I say absolutely not. And so as I would be very mindful of what's important to my constituents, and more importantly than what's popular amongst my constituents is doing what is least harmful, because that's what government does, is it harms us. It doesn't help us. Government's harmful. And so I would look at it from that angle, and I would say, what can we do that harms the least amount of our constituents, and certainly harms, the least, the least violent offensive behavior to, again, the minority of people, which is what a lot of people experience right now. And the minority is the smallest minority is the individual, and so individual rights are critical. And I would support, again, looking out for those individual rights. And just because you're not saying something that's popular doesn't mean you shouldn't have a right to say it, and that your rights shouldn't be protected.
Okay, we were going to try and stop questions at about 5:30 and give you a chance to mingle. Are either of you scheduled after 6 o'clock?
We are.
You both are? Okay. Then we're going to have to, I hate to do the elevator thing where you give a real short answer, because we got some really good questions and I want to get through all of them. So please, real short answers. This is for Brian. Just following up on what you said. Who are you going to caucus with if you win?
I'm going to caucus with, I will be with all over the place. I mean, I share beliefs with both sides of the aisle. And I hate that term, but I would be able on different issues to caucus with different people. So I wouldn't be tied into one specific group, and you wouldn't find me on the same side of every issue like you currently see in Washington right now.
Okay. You have both been in the service. Could you address what you see as the needs of veterans and how you would work to meet those needs? Elissa, I think this is yours.
Pardon, I keep losing track. Apologies. As someone who is on military insurance and gets her health care from the VA, along with my husband and my stepdaughter, making sure that we are fulfilling our responsibility to veterans, to those who served, to those who were injured, to the families, to make sure that that health care is as strong as possible. And we know, obviously, that there are certain areas of the country and certain types of medicine where the VA is not living up to its expectations. And we need someone who actually has experience with those systems, working inside the government to improve those things. And that comes back to accountability. I also think that we need to make sure that the engagements that we do and get involved in abroad they make sense, and they're proportional to the threat that they pose to our country. And I think that will help balance out the number of injured and wounded that we have in the future, which I hope decreases. I think that there are a number of pieces of legislation right now that are looking at cutting disability payments to veterans, particularly those who have less than 30% disability. Obviously, I can't support that. I can't support cuts to veteran support. I believe in a government role in providing for veterans. I also believe that if you are going to serve your country, especially for your career, you deserve to have a benefit package that becomes the service that you provided. And making sure we protect that, not just the benefit, but making sure it doesn't become privatized. I believe that there are some attempts right now to privatize parts of the VA, and I believe that is to make money, and that will end up hurting the veterans on the other side of that care, and I can't support that.
So I think, and I'll try and make it as brief as I can. If you could imagine if Medicaid and Medicare were treated the same way as VA healthcare, where you had to go to a specific doctor and you had to sign up on a waiting list, and you had to, this was the only place you were allowed to go unless you got special permission, and it took several months in order to get appointments. Obviously, that's how the veteran system works right now, and that's a fundamental flaw in the system. And so I think that if veterans care was handled more like we handle Medicare and Medicaid, where it was considered more of an insurance and you could go to a provider of your choosing, I think that would be a much better service for the veterans, and I think it would serve the veteran community a lot better, on top of being much more efficient. We have something called the Veterans Administration that certainly does a lot more than just simply administer. And so I would advocate for those changes.
Okay, moving now to the last 5 here. 6. Please share your thoughts and ideas of what we can do to keep college costs from continuing to skyrocket and only affordable for certain segments of the population.
I would say, you're going to hate this answer. I would limit government funding of education. I heard it mentioned earlier, if we reduce the interest rate on student loans, We know that in a market, if money is cheap, there's more money flooding the market, the cost of goods and services go up. This is supply and demand. And so I would say that, first of all, right now, it's not beneficial for most young people to go to college. And in fact, I've encouraged my son, and he's going into trade school. He's going to become an electrician. And I think that we've stigmatized going into industry versus getting an education. And we've made education this top priority, and unfortunately, the cost of it has exploded. So I would get government out of funding education, which would fundamentally bring down the cost of education itself and would make it available to more people who want to do it.
I take an alternative view where I believe that the role of the federal government is to help set interest rates for loans at 2.5%. And that's a loan whether you want to go to a four-year university, it's a loan whether you want to go to community college, it's a loan if you want to go to a specific training program, it's a loan for any education. And I think the federal government has a role to play in that. I also think, as I said, you can increase the number of federal grants to students who are in high demand industries. Right now, in our mid-Michigan area here, we have a complete mismatch in our job market. We have a ton of vacancies in things like IT, cybersecurity, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, and then we have a huge number of young people who all they want to do is get a good job with good benefits, live their life, succeed. And they're looking at dead-end jobs that they can't go anywhere with. That's a solvable problem. But you need to incentivize, particularly through places like community colleges, you need to incentivize and help bring down the cost of getting that training for those jobs that are in high demand. And the businesses should help us with that, right? If these businesses are all missing IT people, let them help sponsor a program at LCC to train people in IT. You do well, you earn while you learn, you go to school part-time, and you go right into a job. That is a solvable problem if our industries help pay for the education for the jobs that they actually need. And then interest rates need to be at 2.5%.
Real briefly, what is your stance on gay marriage?
I mean, I don't have a stance on gay marriage. Marriage is between two individuals. It's not my business to have a stance on gay marriage. I'm fully supportive of what any individual wants to do with their lives.
I support gay marriage. My mom divorced my dad in 1986, lived the rest of her life as a gay woman, and was never allowed to marry before she passed away. I'm a supporter of gay marriage.
What parts of society should government have a role in?
So I think in an ideal world, right, government is helping in the places where it needs to help, and it is standing back in the places where it does not need to help. And I think we have great examples of great achievements here in the United States that came from government working with the private sector. We put a man on the moon, right? We passed the Civil Rights Act. We moved towards women's equality. And all those things in a best case scenario, it's government doing its job and helping us get there. Are there places where the government is overreaching? Absolutely. Particularly things like regulations on some of our businesses? Absolutely. So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say the whole thing is broken. You go and you have a thoughtful approach to looking at where you need to cut regulation and where you don't, and where you need to protect the environment and keep those protections on the books, and where extra regulation needs to be kicked out. But I believe that in the best case scenario, we have seen some of the great achievements of our country come from a combination of the people and the government coming up with a plan and acting.
I think fundamentally, if the government's involved in anything, the only legitimate role for government is to protect the rights of the individual. And so, I mean, really, it's that simple. In an ideal world, a government wouldn't even exist. We wouldn't need government. But I think that fundamentally, certainly that's not a logical possibility at this point. It's certainly not pragmatic. But I think that where we get this idea of government being involved in every part of our daily life, and you think about everything you do every day, how much government was involved in all of the stuff, everything you purchase, everything you do, everywhere you go, every sidewalk you walk on, the government is neck deep in everything. And really, the only fundamentally right place for a government to exist is to protect the rights of individuals.